Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas. And his Catholic faith is day 157. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 78 and 79 of the Secunda Secundae, that is, of the Sin of Usury and of the quasi-integral parts of justice. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, the 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code SUMMA10. And so here we go. Article 1, whether it is a sin to take money as a price for money lent, which is to receive usury. Usury is when you give $10 to a friend for the week and then require them to pay back $15 at the end of that week. This is unjust, and for the same reason in our last episode, selling a computer for more simply because someone needs it more badly was unjust. In both cases, you are selling something which does not exist. When someone has to pay you back an extra $5 for borrowing $10, what value did you sell them that cost that extra $5? The $5 charge comes out of nowhere, out of nothing, or based on nothing is probably the best way to put it. St. Thomas says, paraphrasing him, imagine you sold a bottle of wine for $5 and then charged an additional $5 for the use of the wine. Key word here is use, from which we derive the word usury from. Would that not be tantamount to selling 1 bottle of wine but charging the buyer 2 bottles for it? Like selling 1 bottle of wine but for twice what it's worth. Now, if you own a house and you charge someone else for the use of the house, this is not the sin of usury because they are not buying the house. They are simply buying an amount of time to use it, and what they are paying for they are receiving. But when you give someone $10, which is not strictly speaking something they will use, it is simply that which they will exchange for something else which they can use. If you charge them for the use of the money, in addition to the loan, you are again selling something which does not exist and forcing the buyer to pay you for something which they never received, which is unjust. And Aquinas' words, it is by its very nature unlawful to take payment for the use of money lent, which payment is known as usury. And just as a man is bound to restore other ill-gotten goods, so he is bound to restore the money which he has taken in usury. Another point worth addressing from within this article is why an evil such as usury might be allowed by the state, although the conscience of the faithful should forbid them to loan to others in such a way. And the reason it might be permitted by civil law is the same reason divorce and remarriage might be permitted by civil law, and that is to prevent revolt, or because the majority of their citizens do not have a well-informed conscience, or they're ensnared in vice, reasons like this. As St. Thomas puts it, human laws leave certain things unpunished on account of the condition of those who are imperfect, and who would be deprived of many advantages if all sins were strictly forbidden and punishments appointed for them. Wherefore, human law has permitted usury, not that it looks upon usury as harmonizing with justice, but lest the advantage of many should be hindered. Moreover, Aristotle, led by natural reason, says, to make money by usury is exceedingly unnatural. Whether it is lawful to ask for any other kind of consideration for money lent. If you give a man $10 as a loan and ask not for money, but for his cell phone case, in addition to those $10 he needs to pay back, is that unlawful? And if the one taking the loan simply wants to give this gift out of the kindness of their heart, they can definitely do so. A man can give a gift as he pleases. But if this was somehow part of the deal, I give you $10 and you have to give me in return at the end of the week $10 plus a cell phone case, then this is again usury. Next, within the article, St. Thomas differentiates usury, charging interest on a loan, which is unjust, with investing in a company and receiving compensation for that investment, which is just. The latter is just because if I invest $1,000 in a roofing company, thus making a part of that business now owned by me, if I have a share in that company, I haven't really given my money away. I've just exchanged it for stock in that company, and thus I have a right to a share in the profits of that company, since it is now in part my company. In Aquinas' words, he that entrusts his money to a merchant or craftsman so as to form a kind of society does not transfer the ownership of his money to them, for it remains his, so that at his risk the merchant speculates with it or the craftsman uses it for his craft, and consequently he may lawfully demand as something belonging to him part of the profits derived from his money. Article 3, whether a man is bound to restore whatever profits he has made out of money gotten by usury, which we've already answered in part in the first article. If one takes $5 from another man, which does not belong to him, then they need to give it back to him. In the same way, if someone loans a man $10 and then forces him to pay $15 in return, they need to give those $5 back, because again, one cannot be forced to buy the use of money along with the possession of the money, since the use of money is the purpose of its possession. Money has no value except to use it in exchange for something else. Then looking at a slightly different example, if I take $500 of my usury gained money and purchase a boat, which I then make $1,000 off of ferrying people across a lake, I don't need to pay back $1,500, since the latter $1,000 included my own effort, my own time, etc., but only the original $500 of usury money I need to give back. And lastly, if I take someone else's house and land as interest on a loan because of usury, as a charge for use of money, and then rent that house and land for $100,000 to someone else, all of that money needs to go back to the original owner, because the rent money was the fruit of usury directly. As St. Thomas puts it in his last point of this article, there are certain things whose use is not their consumption, for instance, house or land, property, and so forth. Wherefore, if a man has by usury extorted from another his house or land, he is bound to restore not only the house or land, but also the fruits accruing to him therefrom, since they are the fruits of things owned by another man, and consequently are due to him. Article 4, whether it is lawful to borrow money under the condition of usury. Can I borrow money if the borrower is going to exact usury from me? And the answer is yes, because shame on him for robbing me this additional use fee. But I may still need the money to pay for a house or something, and so it's not a sin on my part to pay this man an additional fee, which I know he should not charge me for, but what can I do? Maybe I still need this loan. St. Thomas writes, he that suffers injury does not sin. Now, a usurer sins by doing an injury to the person who borrows from him under a condition of usury. Therefore, he that accepts a loan under a condition of usury does not sin. And now into question 79 of the quasi-integral parts of justice. Article 1, whether to decline from evil and to do good are parts of justice. Integral parts of a virtue are parts required for someone to possess the virtue or to possess the perfection of the virtue. Justice is the stable quality of the will through which a man renders each his or her right, whether this be in regard to creatures or the Creator. And therefore justice does require that a man do good and avoid evil. This is the first and most fundamental precept of reason as directed to action. And we see in the very notion or essence of good and the very notion of evil that one ought to do good and avoid evil. It is the foundation for our judgments of conscience, and it is an integral part of the virtue of justice. St. Thomas says, the other moral virtues are concerned with the passions, wherein to do good is to observe the mean, which is the same as to avoid the extremes as evils, so that doing good and avoiding evil come to the same with regard to the other virtues. On the other hand, justice is concerned with operations and external things, wherein to establish equality is one thing, and not to disturb the equality established is another. So this is why we are saying that to do good and to avoid evil is a unique and integral part to the virtue of justice, though we could say in a more general sense all the virtues are concerned with doing good and avoiding evil. Article 2, whether transgression is a special sin. Transgression is a combination of Latin words which could be translated stepping out of bounds. Trans plus graditur, those are the Latin roots. Is stepping out of bounds in the moral life a special sin? And we would think not, because all sin is like that. But if we mean this sin as opposed to a unique virtue, the virtue of justice, then as it is a sin which is opposed to justice in contempt of the law and in positive evil, for all of these reasons, we can consider transgression a unique kind of sin. Article 3, whether omission is a special sin. As being opposed to justice in willful incompletion of an affirmative precept, in the evil of negativa, or absence of the good, the sin of omission is unique. And Aquinas' words, omission signifies the non-fulfillment of a good, not indeed of any good, but of a good that is due. Now, good under the aspect of due belongs properly to justice, just as doing good, which is the opposite of omitting it, is a special part of justice, distinct from avoiding evil, to which transgression is opposed, so too is omission distinct from transgression. Article 4 in our last article, whether a sin of omission is more grievous than a sin of transgression. In a sentence from St. Thomas, which we will then explain, it is easier to refrain from evil deeds than to accomplish good deeds. Therefore, it is a graver sin not to refrain from an evil deed, i.e. to transgress, than not to accomplish a good deed, which is to omit. In other words, it's easier not to kill someone than it is to get yourself to go to Mass on Sunday. Of the 10 commandments, the first, third, fourth are definitely more difficult than the rest. To love God above all, to honor the Sabbath, to honor one's father and mother, and all the commands contained within those precepts, this is harder than just not killing someone, not committing adultery. Therefore, based in one way on the arduousness of doing the good as opposed to the relative ease of avoiding the evil, it is a greater sin to transgress, i.e. to do the evil, than it is to omit, failing to do the good. Giving the last word in our episode to St. Thomas Aquinas, he writes, it is evident that simply and absolutely speaking, transgression is a graver sin than omission, although a particular omission may be graver than a particular transgression. And with that, we come to the close of another episode. We have just finished covering questions 78 and 79 of the Secunda Secundae, that is, of the sin of usury and of the quasi-integral parts of justice. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.